I would like to call the licensing committee to order. Ms. Cito, will you call the roll?
Dr. Salmonson? Here. Dr. Carrion?
Here.
Ms. Chang? Dr. Diego?
Here.
Dr. DeRusso? Ms. Shipsky?
Here.
We have quorum.
Thank you. Well, thank you for coming to licensing. We have a few items to discuss, but first I would like to take public comment on items not on the agenda. I have not received speaker slips, but if anyone does wish to speak, please give a speaker slip to Ms. Thompson. Seeing none, let us proceed to potential approval of the minutes from the May 5th, 2011 meeting.
So moved.
Second.
And apparently that meant no additions or corrections. So will we have a motion? All in favor? Oh, I'm sorry. We also need public comment on the minutes. Thank you. So now let's vote on our motion to approve. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Now we are going to have an overview presentation on Physician and Surgeon International Medical School graduates. And Mr. Warden and Ms. Osito will be giving us that presentation.
Okay, we're going to give you basically an overview of what the physician and surgeon of an international medical graduate needs to do to become for a PTAL, postgraduate training authorization letter, and or a license, and then also the international medical school process for recognition. And we'll start with Ms. Oseto.
Okay, I'll begin the presentation with the International Medical School graduates. This will provide brief information on the process, requirements, and the challenges. International Medical School graduates, defined here in California, is an individual who attended and graduated from a medical school that is not accredited by the Liaison Committee on Medical Education, known as the LCME, or the Committee on Accreditation of Canadian Medical Schools, known as CACMS. The LCME has accredited here in the United States 135 medical schools. They have accredited 17 schools in Canada. There are 5 steps in the accreditation process. The step 1 is the applicant school status. Step 2 is the candidate school status. Step 3 is preliminary recognition. Step 4, provisional accreditation, and Step 5 would be full accreditation. Applicants, international medical school applicants to the California Medical Board are 2 types. The first type would be an individual who's requesting the postgraduate training authorization letter, the PTAL. That is the letter that the board issues, which will authorize the student graduate to commence postgraduate training in California. The second type of applicant would be somebody who has completed all of the requirements and is applying for licensure. Basic requirement includes medical education must be from a medical school that is recognized by the Medical Board of California. We require primary source verification from all medical schools that the applicant attended and or graduated from. This includes Form L2, which is confirms the commencement, transfer, withdrawal, and or graduation from a specific medical school. The Form L5, this confirms the medical student clinical rotations that were completed under the authority of a specified medical school. At the Form L6, this confirms the medical school rotation completion at a specific hospital, and this is where we get into our affiliation agreements. We also require official certified copy of diploma, the official transcripts, and for any documents that are not in English, we require an English translation. The applicant is required to pass a background check through the California Department of Justice and the FBI, and this is a criminal record check. We require a valid U.S. Social Security number that allows the applicant to work in the United States. Evidence of passing the USMLE Step 1, Step 2 CK, and Step 2 CS. Verification that all of the medical school student clinical rotations meet the requirements of Business and Profession Code Sections 2089 and 2089.5. Section 2089 references the basic medical education requirements. Section 2089.5 references the clinical rotations and how those rotations are acceptable. There's a variety of options. And finally, the applicant must not have done anything that would be cause for denial. Our second type of applicant is an international medical graduate who is applying for licensure in California. Again, the medical school education must be from a medical school that's recognized by the Medical Board of California. We require the same primary source verification from the medical schools of attendance and or graduation. We require background check, again, criminal record check, a valid U.S. Social Security number that allows the applicant to work, evidence of passing USMLE Step 1, Step 2 CK, Step 2 CS, and Step 3, which is the final step in the examination series. We require a certificate or status report from the Educational Commission for Foreign Medical Graduates. We require satisfactory completion of a minimum of 2 years of postgraduate training, which is accredited by the Accreditation Council on Graduate Medical Education, known as the ACGME, or the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada, the RCPSC. If the individual completes training accredited by the RCPSC, the Canadian organization, the training must be physically completed in Canada. This organization does accredit training that's completed in both the United Kingdom and Australia, and our statutes do not allow us to recognize that particular postgraduate training. If the individual is licensed in another state, we require license verification. Again, we require verification that all of the medical school student clinical rotations meet the requirements of both Sections 2089 and 2089.5. And again, the applicant must not have done anything that would be cause for denial. This screen here is a sample of our Certificate of Medical Education, the Form L2. This form is required to be provided to the medical school. They must complete it on behalf of the applicant and then send this to us. The next screen here represents both the Forms L5 and L6. These are the clinical clerkships, the medical student rotations. Again, the Form L5 would be completed by the medical school. The Form L6 would be completed in the event the clinical rotation was not completed in the university's teaching hospital. We have some challenges on the clinical rotations. This is probably the portion of the application that is most challenging both for staff and for applicants. California has core clinical student clinical rotation requirements and elective student rotation requirements. These are set forth in statute. Our core rotations are 8 weeks of medicine, 6 weeks of OBGYN, 6 weeks of pediatrics, 4 weeks of psychiatry, 8 weeks of surgery, 8 weeks of a surgical subspecialty, and if the person graduated on or after May 1st, 1998, there is a 4-week requirement in family medicine. The clinical elective rotations is a 36-week rotation requirement if the student graduated prior to May 1st, 1998. If they graduated after May 1st, 1998, they need 32 weeks. The rotations total 72 weeks. When the family medicine rotation was added, the rotations did not increase, they just changed. Some of the challenges that the students encounter would be the medical student clinical rotation was completed in a hospital not formally affiliated to the student's medical school. The medical student clinical rotations were not completed in ACGME hospitals. The medical student clinical rotation does not meet the required number of weeks. The student did not participate in the required subject rotation, or the medical student completed clinical rotations without the approval of their medical school. So staff reviews applications. All of these factors are considered and they're reviewed on a continuing basis. The clinical rotations, because there are challenges with them, it's not uncommon for some of these applicants to have some deficiencies. We have, over the years, arrived at a number of common remedies, and staff does apply these on a regular basis before they make contact with our applicant. Our first option would be if the individual has completed postgraduate training, we would request a breakdown of the clinical training that the clinical rotations that they completed within that training program. We have authority under Business and Professions Code Section 2067 to consider training that is beyond the required 2 years to meet deficiencies. Another option would be if the individual is in a training program at the time of application, to advise them of the deficiency and allow the applicant to complete the rotation within their current training program. Again, that rotation would be beyond the minimum 2-year requirement for licensure. We've authorized applicants to complete rotations in ACGME-approved hospitals. We've allowed them to return to their medical school of graduation and complete the full portion of the rotation. We have what is called a special program here in California. There are 2 hospitals approved for medical student rotations. These are for international medical schools. It's a very unique program, but these 2 facilities, one both in Northern California and one in Southern California, have been utilized to offer deficient rotations. Our applicants encounter some challenges. The first one, and probably the primary, is the time delay in obtaining the primary source documentation from the medical school. Some of that is beyond their control. It's also beyond our control. Another concern is when the documentation is received, it's not completed or it's not completed accurately. Staff reviews these applications on a regular basis as documentation is received. They are very complex, so they are time intensive. The clinical student rotations completed outside the authority or jurisdiction of the medical school, those are the rotations that need the most research. Generally then will result in a deficiency, and again, if there's a deficiency, then we review the application to determine if there's a way to remedy that. Verification that each international medical school of attendance is recognized by the board and that the school of attendance was recognized by the board at the time of attendance. I'd like to entertain any questions you might have or anything that I might not have made clear.
Well, I have a couple. I don't know if it's kind of unfair, I don't know if you have this statistic, but among U.S. Canadian grads, do you have a sense of what percentage have a problem with their background check, which puts them into a higher level review? Do you have a sense of what kind of percentage of U.S. Canadian grads that have like DUIs or something that puts them?
I don't have the percentages of that broken out. I mean, we have roughly but around 3% of all applicants have it broken out.
Because I'm curious, if they've not been in the U.S., is there reciprocity of reporting for whatever criminal activity they might have had in the country of their medical school? Would our background check reveal that?
No. We have a question on our application that asks the individual to reveal that information, but we do not check Interpol. We don't have the ability to do that.
Is that not, I mean, if I were a U.S. Canadian grad and my application were held up because of a background check, I would say that's an uneven, is that not a problem that we don't check? That, because one of our big things is character, and if they refuse to review, and they're probably clever enough to know that we can't check, is that not a concern?
Well, most of our applicants have been here in the United States for quite a while. So if they're they don't just come from another country.
No, I understand, but...
So they do have to get here legally, and as part of the immigration process, they go through a background check also. So they're actually getting two background checks, once for immigration, once for us. But as far as most of our international applicants for P-1000 or licensure have been in the United States for at least a couple of years, and some of them are U.S. citizens, and a lot of them are U.S. citizens. So. For a long time, and have lived here, but chose to go to school in a foreign country.
Well, some yes, some no, but one of the things we were talking about in the break, our previous presentation, is how perhaps DUIs during the training can impact, licensure. Well, if you weren't here and you were engaged in some unwise choices, we might not know about it because it's self-report. Is kind of that.
If it was of such a magnitude that it caused a break in their school service or some other action by the school, then we would know that.
But DUIs in the host country, we would not know about, presumably.
Not unless it resulted in some action by the school.
Any concerns about that, or that just we feel we're pretty comfortable that that's okay?
Well, regardless of comfort level, I think there is a limitation, practically speaking, as to what you can do.
How hard is it to check Interpol or DUI?
Well, I think you need to have
even
special
reported?
authority to do that, and I don't believe Interpol takes these kinds of requests from licensing agencies.
Okay. Because I'm not sure the value of even asking them if we can't verify.
Well, it is valuable because most of the applicants are honest. So
That's the ones who aren't that we're worried about. I'm giving you guys a hard time. Any other questions or comments? Only because when we wrestle with that failure to report, or, they termed out of it, and yet we kind of ding them for that if we find a dishonesty, but we have another pool of people for whom we don't really have that measure. And I think character is such a concern as much as knowledge for a potential licensee.
I understand your concern, but I don't think it's a big issue because, like I said, a lot of our international graduates are U.S. citizens to begin with, or they have lived here for quite a while. So that's something that I consider not a huge thing. And we have methods to catch a lot of that stuff. As Anita said, our review of the application is very thorough, and we catch inconsistencies and we look for breaks. And so if it happened during medical school or something like that, where, like Ms. Scurry said, that it was obvious, then we would catch that. And so the medical schools also answer those kind of questions. Have they had breaks and all those things? That's on the L2 form. Okay. So it's not, I don't think, something to be overly concerned about. So we have a very good process in place, and I don't think Interpol's designed to address our issues.
And your statute makes reference only specifically to the Department of Justice and the FBI. So the law contemplates those two checks. It doesn't contemplate another. Nothing, no system, no government system is perfect, but there are some built-in checks and balances. I think that will help minimize any problems that you might see.
For the international medical graduates, I think that immigration is very strict, and the doctors who they want to have a training here, they are very, very well checked by immigration, right?
Well, I do know that they go through a background check to be able to immigrate here. Having friends who have gone through that process who are from foreign countries, and it wasn't easy coming here. So.
Right. It's very, very difficult, especially these days. In my days it was easy, but now it's very, very strict.
I bet it is. So I have one question. Is one of the things that you kept on mentioning were primary source verification. A lot of employers do primary source verification. We do too, and so it's always a challenge. But you wonder, isn't there some collaboration that we as a medical board can have with these schools since we accredit them, that we could say, hey, if you want accreditation, we want this turnaround when we asked for primary source verification as part of the collaboration of having them accredited for the California Medical Board?
Okay. Well, let me take a step back. There are two ways that a school can be recognized. We distinguish between approved schools, which are recognized, which are accredited in the U.S. and Canada, and schools that are recognized by the board. One category, this is laid out in Section 1314.1 of your regulations. One category involves government schools designed to train people from their own country. And those schools the board does not actually look at, but they have recognition de facto under the regulation. The other smaller group of schools are those primarily for-profit entities that Caribbean started with Caribbean schools, but there are many in Europe and other countries that are designed to train people who are not their citizens. And there are a lot of U.S. citizens who go to those schools. But technically they are not accredited by the board. We've determined that the board has determined that they meet the minimum standards, but they don't actually accredit them in the same way that the LCME accredits U.S. schools. It's a slightly different process.
And then to address perhaps the second portion of your question, schools in international countries don't necessarily feel an obligation or have an interest in their graduates obtaining licensure in California. So the process really is dependent upon the individual applicant making contact with that school and facilitating the completion of the forms and having them submitted to us. In some instances, we do communicate directly. If we've had forms completed on a couple of occasions and they're incomplete, we'll try to facilitate some of that by making a direct communication. But by statute and by design of the process, it really is the applicant's responsibility to encourage their medical school to assist them.
Any other questions or comments?
Can you identify the two schools you mentioned? One in Northern California, one in Southern California that provides, if they need to get the clinical?
Those are not medical schools. They are hospitals that are recognized under Section 1327. It's out of the California Code of Regulations. The one in Northern California is Alameda County Hospital, and the one here in Southern California is Metropolitan State Hospital.
Well, that's a psychiatric hospital.
Yes.
Why would that be?
Because they're a psychiatric hospital, and one of the common clinical rotation deficiencies is
So
psychiatry.
they don't get psychiatric?
And they can go there and get a very good education in psychiatry.
It's an amazing program.
It's a very amazing program. I've been there. I've seen it.
And they're very kind to accommodate individuals who need clinical rotations and electives, because they could do that in psychiatry also.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions or comments from the public with respect to this? Well, thank you very much, and I think you have another presentation for us on the designation and recognition of international medical schools.
We're going to switch. So this part of the presentation is about the international medical school recognition process that the medical board does. And one of the common questions that I receive daily is regarding the World Health Organization for medical school students. And it is, my medical school is on the WHO list of medical schools accredited by WHO. Therefore, the Medical Board of California should recognize my school. Doesn't WHO accredit medical schools? Well, actually, WHO does not accredit any medical schools. They provide a listing of medical schools. And prior to 2008, WHO created and maintained a list of international medical schools reported by the medical schools, students, governments, and others. But at no time did WHO accredit or approve these schools. Beginning in 2008, WHO transferred this responsibility to the University of Copenhagen to maintain and edit the list of international medical schools. This is also not an accreditation process, And if you would like, you can go directly to the University of Copenhagen site to verify that. They are in the process of keeping that list maintained and adding it to it. Another question we commonly get is about the Educational Commission for Foreign Medical Graduates, because as a medical graduate requirement, they're required to have a certificate from them. And to attain a certificate from them, the medical school must be on their list of schools. So you'll get this common question: my school's on the ECFMG list of medical schools accredited by the ECFMG. Should the board recognize my school? Again, ECFMG does not recognize or accredit medical schools. They do provide a list of schools. In order to get on that list, it actually has to come from the government agency in that government to contacts, and there is a little bit of process about verifying the school actually is in that country, but they do not accredit schools. The ECFMG has identified 2,195 international medical schools. They are located in 172 countries and territories. And since 2002, ECFMG has identified a 14% increase in international medical schools. Some of the ECFMG functions include create and maintain a list of international medical schools verified by the appropriate country oversight agency. They also sponsor international J1 visa physicians, and that's physicians who come here to train to learn something to take back to their country. So they help assist that with the J1 visas. And they also administer an English language assessments to international medical schools. To become for the J1 visa students, they must be co-sponsored by a medical school in the United States in order to get that J1 visa. ECFMG also administers USMLE Step 1, Step 2CK, and Step 2CS to international medical students after they've verified that they have attended a school that's at least in a country that's on their list. They also issue certification status reports or certificates for the passing of the English language assessment, USMLE Steps 1, Step 2CK, and Step 2CS, and that they've graduated from a school on their list. So the medical board recognizes medical schools within the United States and internationally. For the United States, as Ms. Scurry pointed out, the LCME and we pointed out earlier, is the Liaison Committee on Medical Education, is the national recognized accreditation agency authorized by the United States Department of Education to accredit medical schools in the United States, Canada, and the United States territories. LCME conducts assessments of the fiscal soundness and educational curriculum. He also conducts site visits at the physical location of medical school facilities and teaching hospitals to reach a determination of the school's eligibility for accreditation. For international medical schools, there is no recognized international accreditation agency to conduct assessments and evaluations of any international medical schools. The Medical Board of California evaluates medical schools in accordance with BMP Sections 2089, 2089.5, and California Code Regulations Section 1314.1 to conduct the assessment of fiscal soundness and educational curriculum. The Medical Board also conducts site visits of the physical location of medical school facilities and teaching hospitals to reach determinations of the school's eligibility for accreditation or recognition, I should say, not accreditation.
And it's a sampling of those sites.
And yes, it's a sampling. It doesn't go to everyone. And that is for the schools who are applying for recognition under 1314.1A2. So we'll go into that a little bit more now. There are two methods, as I said before, is the 1314.A1, which is a medical school that is owned and operated by the government of the country in which it is located, or is a bona fide nonprofit institution registered with or otherwise approved by the country in which it is domiciled the medical school is a component of a university offering other graduate and professional degree programs that contribute to the academic environment of the medical school, and the medical school's primary purpose is educating its own citizens to practice medicine in that country. For example, in Australia, the University of Sydney Faculty of Medicine fits that requirement.
So just to clarify, that the board does not go look at those schools. They are, when the materials are received showing that they meet the criteria listed in that section of the regulations, then they're automatically recognized.
For California Code Regulations Section 1314.1A2 schools, the medical school is chartered by the jurisdiction which is domiciled. The primary purpose of the medical school program is to educate non-citizens to practice medicine in other countries, and the medical school meets the standards set forth in the section below, which is part of that, which is a big list of stuff that I did not include. For an example of that is the school that we recently recognized at the last board meeting, which is located in Antigua, which was the American University of Antigua College of Medicine. The board did the assessments and the reviews and actually conducted a site visit to two of the major teaching hospitals the school used and the actual medical school. And the next slide is a list of is a picture of the website of the medical board regarding the medical school recognition by the Medical Board of California. This is the primary page, and in this page it has a warning to students regarding English language programs that are becoming very popular in non-English speaking countries. Those programs are for-profit to teach citizens of other than their own, from other countries than what their country is. We recently recognized a school regarding that in Poland by the name of Silesia Medical School. So the next couple of slides are regarding medical schools listed in India. I chose this slide because India has one of the most medical schools internationally. So, and they all have a lot of very similar names. As you can see, you'll see the way they do their schools, it's very similar. They also are in the process of making a lot of changes to their medical schools. So the medical schools that are on our recognized list, and when an applicant applies, they must match our recognized list exactly, because otherwise there's probably been a change at that school. And the board would need to verify if that change results in anything that is not still be able to be recognized. We get a lot of questions about why are not the U.S. schools listed on the website, but they are. They're listed here under the United States, and that's where we list all the United schools in the United States. We also list all the Canadian schools. So for the international recognition process, there is also tomorrow you'll see in your board packet an Exhibit 15C of the full board, but the listing of non-recognized international schools that the licensing program has either applications for recognition, or we have received applications from applicants from schools that are not recognized. So as far as the recognition process goes, I'll start with the 1314.1A1 type. The medical board receives information from the International Medical School itself or from an applicant applying for a PTAL or licensure. Staff researches the International Medical School. During that research, the staff makes a determination if the medical school may qualify for recognition pursuant to Section 1314.1A1. Staff then contacts the International Medical School for specific necessary documentation in order to make that determination. Once staff receives that information and analyzes the information, is presented to the Chief of License and legal counsel to analyze the documents and determine if the school is can be recognized under the 1314.A1 as a government-owned school or a bona fide nonprofit school in that country, primarily for the source teaching of its citizens. For schools who would apply for recognition under 1314.A2, there's a little more questions to be asked and more stuff to be obtained. This includes the English language programs of any of the countries who have even a school that's recognized under 1314.A1, because that school is now for profit and is for citizens other than of that country. There are a lot of schools that are starting to do that, especially in Europe, and we've been told that there are several in China starting to do that. The board receives the International Medical School Self-Assessment Report or its equivalent documentation. Staff will review the submitted documentation to try to identify areas that do not comply or may need more further clarification with the statutes of 2089 and 2089.5 and for the requirements of 1314.1. Staff will prepare a document to provide to our medical consultant, who will get a complete copy of everything in staff's review. The medical consultant will review all the information that is provided by the medical school, look at staff's documents regarding what staff has identified, and most likely the medical consultant will request additional clarifying and supporting documentation. Sometimes this takes several times to get through that process as we receive additional documentations and more questions are brought up. Once that review is complete, the medical consultant prepares and presents a report to the board members with findings and recommendations. The board will determine whether or not it needs a site visit and the authorization to proceed with a site visit. Once that determination has been made to proceed with a site visit, staff will contact the medical school and advise that a site visit is necessary to continue in the process. The medical school must agree to the site visit and pay in advance the estimated cost of the site visit. Once the school agrees to that, staff will start preparing the site visit documentation for the governor's approval. Once we receive governor's approval, we'll start making the arrangements with the medical school, arrange for the payment in advance, and develop the site visit team. The medical board site visit team consists of the executive director or the chief of licensing, a member of the board, legal counsel, and the medical consultant. After the site visit, a report is prepared a preliminary report is prepared after the site visit and is provided to the medical school for comment. After the board receives the comments from the medical school, the site visit team reviews those comments and prepares a final site visit report and presents to the board members with the findings and recommendations. At that time, the board will make a determination of the status recognition for the medical school. Possible determinations include recognition with conditions, or disapproval. Reasons medical schools choose not to apply for recognition. Medical school may not actually be a physical location. It could just be a website.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Medical school facility lacks adequate funding, administration, curriculum, qualified faculty members, medical students, and clinical facilities. Teaching faculty are attending the same medical school to obtain a medical degree at the same time. Medical school education does not meet the minimum requirements of Business and Professions Codes 2089, 29.5, or California Code of Regulations 1314.1. Student enrollment exceeds capacity of school facilities. Education is not limited to medical students. Graduates are unable to practice in the country of the medical school. Medical school doesn't have a charter or is not recognized by the country where the school is located, or the government shuts down a medical school based on fraud. Those are all actual reasons of schools not applying. So, and as we said, we have approximately 1,500 schools listed on our list on the website. That does not mean there are 1,500 individual schools. That means some of them have been the same school, have gone through changes and are listed more than once due to the fact that we don't take them off. So.
May I offer just a brief bit of history? I think the reason the board got into the business of looking at the schools was before my time with the board in the 1980s, when the Caribbean schools first started to come into prominence. And there were some issues, there were many articles in the paper about so-called diploma mills, both U.S. and otherwise. And the board ended up being sued at one point, did site visits on some of the schools, and gave sort of provisional recognition contingent upon making changes at some of the larger Caribbean schools. After that, it became the standard to look at them if they chose to want their graduates to be eligible for either to do clinical rotations in California, to do postgraduate training in California, or to be licensed in California. And I know that I went on a site visit, the first site visit that I went on, and there were no regulations. And so now the regulations that the board has are really derived from and based upon LCME's regulations, so that there is some parity between the two. The review is not, I'm sure, as intensive as LCME, but I think you get a good flavor for what the school is like, especially the consultants who have expertise in the accreditation area. And there's always the consultant is picked for that expertise. And it's, I think, been a valuable thing for the citizens of California.
Well, a question, and I liked the presentation very much. It was really helpful to clarify a lot of things, and we've kind of heard a little bit about the two types of international schools, one where the primary purpose is to educate their citizens versus the more business model, perhaps, where they're educating the non-citizens primarily. But are those graduates, are those schools recognized by their host country or not? I mean, or does that vary?
The for-profit ones?
Yes.
They have to have some recognition. That's one of the criteria of the regulations.
So, like, if the student decided, wow, I really like this location, I'd like to practice here, that school degree would presumably be recognized by the host country?
Well,
if they had other immigration issues, but basically the degree from that school would be recognized by the host country?
That depends on the actual school and country of it that is located in. Okay. Some of the school countries will actually grant recognition for and let the citizens of their country who attend that school practice medicine there, but
yes.
they will not let the international students practice.
But the school itself must have some sort of legal authority.
Well, that's what I guess, yeah, so that the local host country is sort of looking at that school also, or at least if their local citizens want to attend it, whether they'd recognize it or not?
As far as the ones that we have recognized, yes.
Okay. Okay, very good. Any other questions from the committee? Any questions from the public or comments? Well, in that case, I think we're ready to get agenda items for our February meeting, which will be February, presumably 2nd, the board meeting is 2nd and 3rd in San Francisco. Any topics for licensing agenda? Well, if we think of any between now and then, please let Kurt or staff know. And then I will take a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Let's adjourn. Thank you all.